When the desperate roar of a lioness shattered the silence of the Tanzanian wilderness at dawn, no one at the Serengeti Wildlife Sanctuary could have predicted that this moment would mark the beginning of the most extraordinary interspecies bond ever documented. The newborn lion cub, abandoned by his mother within hours of his first breath, would find salvation in the arms of a marine veterinarian who never imagined his battlefield medical training would prepare him for raising one of Africa's most powerful predators like his own child. Dr. Marcus Rivera had seen enough trauma in his 34 years to last several lifetimes. After 2 tours treating wounded soldiers in Afghanistan, he'd traded his military fatigues for khaki field clothes, seeking healing in the vast plains of Tanzania, where he now served as head veterinarian at the Serengeti Wildlife Sanctuary. His weathered hands, once steady under enemy fire while performing emergency surgery in makeshift field hospitals, now worked with the same precision to save Africa's most vulnerable wildlife. The sanctuary sprawled across 15,000 acres of pristine savanna, home to rescued and rehabilitated animals that couldn't survive in the wild. Marcus had dedicated the last 3 years of his life to this place, finding purpose in giving second chances to creatures that the world had written off as lost causes. His small clinic, equipped with solar panels and satellite internet, felt like a world away from the chaos he'd left behind in the military. But nothing in his medical training, neither human nor veterinarian, had prepared him for what would happen on that sweltering morning in March 2023. The radio crackled to life at 5:47 a.m., pulling him from restless dreams that still sometimes featured the sound of helicopter rotors and distant explosions. Rangers had found a lioness in severe distress near the northern border of the sanctuary, and they were bringing her in immediately. Marcus threw on his clothes and rushed to the clinic, his mind already running through the possibilities. Injury from territorial disputes, poisoning from local farmers, snare wounds from poachers. He'd seen it all before. The morning air hung thick with humidity as he prepared his surgical suite, checking instruments and medication dosages with the methodical precision that had kept countless soldiers alive in combat zones. When the ranger vehicle pulled up, dust swirling in the early sunlight, Marcus knew immediately that this case would be different. The lioness lay unconscious on the transport stretcher, her golden coat matted with blood, her breathing shallow and labored. But it was her swollen belly that caught his attention first. She was heavily pregnant, and by the look of her condition, there wasn't much time left. The lioness had been caught in a poacher's wire snare for what the rangers estimated to be at least 18 hours. The crude trap had cut deep into her left hind leg, severing muscle and causing massive blood loss. Worse yet, the stress and trauma had triggered early labor contractions. Marcus could see the signs immediately. Her body was trying to give birth while fighting for its own survival. Working alongside Dr. Sarah Kimani, the sanctuary's wildlife specialist, Marcus administered emergency fluids and pain medication. The lioness's vital signs were dangerously unstable. Her heart rate fluctuated wildly, and her breathing remained shallow despite the oxygen mask they'd placed over her muzzle. Every few minutes, her body would tense with another contraction, a reminder that 2 lives hung in the balance. For 14 grueling hours, the medical team fought to save both mother and cub. Marcus's military training kicked in as he worked with the same focused intensity he'd once reserved for treating wounded soldiers in combat zones. He sutured torn muscle, administered blood transfusions from their emergency supply, and monitored the lioness's failing vital signs with growing concern. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, that crushing awareness that someone's life depended entirely on the steadiness of his hands and the clarity of his decisions. Dr. Kimani assisted with the delivery as the lioness finally gave birth to a single male cub. The tiny creature emerged silent and motionless, his golden fur still slicked with birth fluids. For a terrifying moment, Marcus thought they'd lost him. But then the cub's tiny chest began to rise and fall with shallow, rapid breaths. He was alive, barely weighing 2 pounds, his eyes still sealed shut in the helpless vulnerability of newborn wildlife. The mother lioness never regained consciousness after the birth. Despite their best efforts, the combination of blood loss, infection, and trauma proved too much for her weakened body. She died peacefully just as the sun was setting, leaving behind a cub who had never felt his mother's warm tongue cleaning his fur or heard her protective rumble.
Marcus stood in the quiet clinic, the newborn cub wrapped in soft towels under a heat lamp, and felt the familiar ache of loss that he carried from too many battlefields. But this time, there was also something else, a tiny life that still had a chance, if someone was willing to fight for it. The cub would need feeding every 2 hours, around the clock, for weeks. He would need constant warmth, medical monitoring, and the kind of dedicated care that went far beyond normal veterinary duties. The sanctuary's protocol was clear. Orphaned cubs this young rarely survived without their mothers, and the resources required often weren't justified. But Marcus looked at the tiny creature, no bigger than a house cat, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The first night nearly broke Marcus's resolve. He'd set up a makeshift nursery in his quarters, a converted shipping container that served as his living space behind the clinic. Using heating pads and blankets, he created a warm nest for the cub, whom he'd decided to call Aslan after spending hours staring at the tiny creature's perfect miniature features. Every 2 hours, Marcus's alarm would pierce the African night. He'd stumble from his narrow bed, prepare the specialized formula that Dr. Kimani had helped him research, and attempt to coax the reluctant cub to drink from a modified bottle. Aslan was weak, his sucking reflex barely developed, and feeding sessions often lasted 45 minutes of patient persistence. During the 2 a.m. feeding on the second night, Aslan suddenly stopped breathing. Marcus watched in horror as the tiny body went limp in his hands, the small chest completely still. Without thinking, he began infant CPR, his fingers barely able to find the minuscule rib cage. For 90 seconds that felt like hours, he alternated between gentle chest compressions and rescue breaths through the cub's tiny nostrils. Then Aslan gasped, his golden eyes fluttering open for the first time, focusing on Marcus's worried face. In that moment, something profound shifted between them. The cub made a soft, mewing sound, barely audible, but to Marcus it sounded like recognition, like gratitude. He carefully lifted Aslan against his chest, feeling the rapid heartbeat against his palm, and whispered promises into the darkness about never giving up. Word of the orphaned cub spread quickly through the sanctuary. Dr. Kimani visited daily, monitoring Aslan's weight gain and development. The other staff members were supportive, but realistic about the challenges ahead. Lion cubs raised without their mothers often developed behavioral problems, lacked essential survival skills, and struggled to integrate with their own species later in life. Marcus's supervisor, Dr. Elena Okafor, pulled him aside after the first week. She was a seasoned wildlife veterinarian from Nigeria who'd seen countless rescue attempts fail despite the best intentions. Her expression was gentle but firm as she explained the sanctuary's position. The resources required to hand-raise a lion cub were enormous. The specialized diet alone would cost thousands of dollars over the coming months. The time commitment meant Marcus would essentially be on duty 24 hours a day for the foreseeable future. And even if Aslan survived to adulthood, finding an appropriate placement for a human-raised lion was nearly impossible. She strongly recommended transferring Aslan to a larger facility with more resources, or making the difficult decision to euthanize him humanely before he suffered further. Marcus listened quietly, understanding the practical logic behind her concerns. But when he looked at Aslan, now strong enough to lift his head and track movement with curious amber eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away. Marcus requested a private meeting with Dr. Okafor the following morning. He'd spent the entire night formulating his proposal, weighing every argument while Aslan slept peacefully against his chest. The military had taught him that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with words and unwavering determination. He presented his case methodically, drawing on his medical background and combat experience. He volunteered to cover all of Aslan's expenses from his own savings,
included the combat pay he'd accumulated during his overseas deployments. He proposed adjusting his work schedule to accommodate the cub's needs while maintaining his veterinary responsibilities at the sanctuary. Most importantly, he committed to documenting every aspect of Aslan's development for potential research value. Dr. Okafor listened with growing interest as Marcus outlined his plan. His military precision and medical expertise made him uniquely qualified for this challenge. The sanctuary could benefit from the research data, and Marcus's willingness to shoulder the financial burden removed their biggest concern. After consulting with the sanctuary's board of directors, she agreed to a trial period of 3 months. The real work began immediately. Marcus transformed his living quarters into a specialized nursery, installing temperature monitors, backup heating systems, and a small refrigeration unit for formula storage. He created detailed feeding charts, weight tracking logs, and behavioral observation notes that read like military intelligence reports. Aslan's feeding schedule dominated every aspect of Marcus's life. The cub required nutrition every 2 hours initially, gradually extending to every 3 hours as he grew stronger. Marcus learned to prepare bottles with military efficiency, testing temperature and consistency while Aslan mewed impatiently from his heated bed. Sleep became a luxury measured in 90-minute intervals. Marcus's colleagues noticed the exhaustion etched in his weathered face, the way he'd sometimes doze off during staff meetings, jerking awake at the slightest sound. His hands, once steady as a rock during surgery, occasionally trembled from fatigue as he performed routine procedures. But the exhaustion was balanced by moments of pure wonder. When Aslan first opened his eyes and focused on Marcus's face with unmistakable recognition, when the cub's tiny paws kneaded against his chest during feeding, when Aslan began following him around the small living space with unsteady but determined steps. By the end of the first month, Aslan had doubled his birth weight and was showing remarkable signs of intelligence and curiosity. He'd learned to recognize the sound of Marcus's footsteps, becoming agitated when separated from his human caregiver for more than a few minutes. The attachment was clearly mutual, though Marcus tried to maintain professional distance. He found himself talking to Aslan constantly, explaining his daily routines and sharing stories from his military service that he'd never told another living soul. The first breakthrough came when Aslan was 6 weeks old. Marcus had been trying to encourage natural hunting instincts by dragging a small rope toy across the floor during their play sessions. For days, Aslan showed mild interest but no predatory response. Then one morning, as Marcus was preparing breakfast, he heard an unusual sound from the living area, a low, rumbling purr that seemed too deep for such a small creature. He found Aslan crouched low, his amber eyes locked onto the rope toy with laser focus. His tiny body was perfectly positioned, muscles coiled with instinctive precision. Then he pounced, his movement fluid and graceful despite his size. Marcus felt his breath catch as he witnessed the first glimpse of the magnificent predator Aslan was destined to become. The cub's personality began emerging in delightful and sometimes challenging ways. Aslan developed a fascination with Marcus's military dog tags, batting at them with his paws whenever Marcus leaned over to feed him. He learned to recognize the sound of the clinic radio, immediately perking up and looking toward the door whenever it crackled to life, as if understanding that interesting things happened when Marcus received calls. Most remarkably, Aslan began mimicking Marcus's daily routines. When Marcus performed his morning exercises, a habit maintained from his military days, Aslan would stretch and roll nearby, his movements surprisingly synchronized with the human's push-ups and sit-ups. When Marcus sat at his small desk to update medical records, Aslan would curl up on a towel beside the computer, his breathing slow and content. Dr. Kimani visited frequently to monitor Aslan's development, and she was astounded by the cub's rapid learning. Unlike wild cubs, who learned primarily through play with siblings and observation of their mother's hunting, Aslan was developing problem-solving skills through his interaction with human environments. He learned to open cabinet doors by watching Marcus, figured out how to turn on the battery-powered radio by pawing at the buttons, and even developed a system of different vocalizations for various needs.
The most touching development was Aslan's response to Marcus's nightmares. The combat veteran still occasionally woke in cold sweats, his mind trapped in memories of explosions and casualties. During these episodes, Aslan would immediately climb onto Marcus's chest, his small body warm and solid, purring with an intensity that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's entire being. It was during one of these midnight comfort sessions that Marcus realized their bond had transcended the typical human-animal relationship. Aslan wasn't just surviving under his care. The cub was providing emotional healing that months of therapy had failed to achieve. The steady rhythm of Aslan's breathing, the trust implicit in his relaxed posture, the unconditional acceptance in those golden eyes, all of it was slowly mending parts of Marcus's soul that he'd thought were permanently damaged. As Aslan entered his 4th month, the challenges multiplied exponentially. What had been a manageable routine with a small cub became increasingly complex with a rapidly growing predator. Aslan now weighed nearly 15 pounds. His play had become rougher, and his natural instincts were asserting themselves in ways that made Marcus's living situation precarious. The first serious incident occurred during a routine morning feeding. Aslan, now strong enough to knock Marcus off balance, lunged for the bottle with such enthusiasm that his claws accidentally raked across Marcus's forearm, leaving 4 parallel gashes that required stitches. Dr. Kimani treated the wounds while delivering a stern lecture about the inherent dangers of raising a wild predator in confined quarters. The sanctuary's insurance company learned about Aslan's presence through a routine inspection report. They immediately issued an ultimatum. Either the cub would be relocated to an appropriate facility, or the sanctuary's liability coverage would be terminated. Dr. Akaffer called an emergency meeting with the board of directors, and Marcus found himself defending his decision in front of a room full of skeptical faces. Board member Dr. James Mwangi, a respected conservationist from Nairobi, raised the most pointed concerns. He questioned whether Marcus's attachment to Aslan was compromising his judgment, potentially putting both the cub and the sanctuary at risk. He cited statistics showing that human-raised big cats often developed behavioral disorders, became dangerously unpredictable, and faced shortened lifespans due to their inability to integrate with their own species. The local Tanzanian wildlife authorities began asking questions after receiving reports of an illegally kept lion cub. Inspector Grace Mahando arrived unannounced one afternoon, demanding to see permits and documentation for Aslan's care. Marcus spent 2 tense hours explaining the circumstances of the rescue, while Inspector Mahando examined every detail of his setup, taking photographs and notes with bureaucratic thoroughness. Meanwhile, Aslan's needs were outgrowing Marcus's modest quarters. The cub required more space to exercise, a more complex diet including larger prey items, and social stimulation that a single human couldn't provide. His vocalizations had grown louder, his play more destructive, and his strength increasingly difficult to manage during routine care. The breaking point came when Aslan, now 4 months old and weighing 28 pounds, accidentally knocked over Marcus's desk during an enthusiastic greeting, destroying weeks of research notes and damaging expensive computer equipment. As Marcus surveyed the destruction, Aslan sat among the scattered papers with an expression of innocent confusion, his tail twitching with residual excitement. That night, Marcus lay awake listening to Aslan's restless pacing in the small space, realizing that his love for the cub was becoming the very thing that might harm him. The confined environment was stunting Aslan's natural development, and the isolation from other lions was creating behavioral patterns that could never be reversed. The phone call from Dr. Akafer came the following morning, delivering news that Marcus had been dreading, but expecting.
Dr. Rebecca Thompson arrived at the sanctuary 3 days later, her credentials preceding her like an impressive shadow. As the world's leading expert on captive lion behavior and rehabilitation, she has consulted on cases across 5 continents and published groundbreaking research on human-animal bonding in big cats. Her reputation was built on brutal honesty and scientific rigor, qualities that made sanctuary administrators respect her opinions and fear her conclusions. Marcus watched nervously as Dr. Thompson observed Aslan during their morning routine. She took detailed notes as the young lion demonstrated his various learned behaviors, opening cabinet doors, responding to verbal commands, and showing what appeared to be genuine affection toward Marcus. Her expression remained professionally neutral, giving no indication of her thoughts as she documented every interaction. The examination itself was revealing. Dr. Thompson tested Aslan's reflexes, measured his physical development, and assessed his cognitive responses to various stimuli. She was particularly interested in his reaction to recorded lion vocalizations, his response to mirror images, and his behavior when presented with unfamiliar humans. Aslan showed remarkable intelligence and emotional stability, but also displayed concerning signs of species confusion. When Dr. Thompson interviewed Marcus privately, her questions were penetrating and methodical. She inquired about his motivations, his long-term plans for Aslan, and his understanding of the ethical implications of their relationship. Marcus found himself defending decisions he'd made instinctively, explaining feelings that he'd never articulated, even to himself. Her preliminary assessment was both encouraging and sobering. Aslan showed exceptional physical health and psychological resilience, far exceeding typical survival rates for orphaned cubs. His bond with Marcus had clearly provided the emotional security necessary for healthy development during those critical early months. However, at 4 months old, he was approaching a developmental threshold where prolonged isolation from his own species could cause permanent behavioral modifications. Dr. Thompson's expertise extended beyond academic knowledge. She had personally worked with dozens of human-raised big cats, witnessing both remarkable success stories and heartbreaking failures. She spoke candidly about lions who never learned to hunt, who became aggressive toward their own species, who lived their entire lives in psychological limbo between the human and animal worlds. But she also acknowledged something extraordinary in Aslan's case. His cognitive development was unusually advanced, his emotional regulation remarkably stable, and his physical condition exceptional. Most significantly, his attachment to Marcus appeared secure rather than pathologically dependent, a crucial distinction that could determine his future adaptability. The turning point came during her 3rd day of observation. Dr. Thompson was documenting Aslan's play behavior when she witnessed something that made her pause mid-sentence in her recorded notes. Marcus had been called away to treat an injured zebra, leaving Aslan alone in the quarters for the first time since her arrival. Instead of becoming agitated or destructive, Aslan had settled into a calm routine, entertaining himself with puzzle toys and eventually falling asleep in his favorite spot near Marcus's bed. Dr. Thompson's final report landed on Dr. Okaffer's desk like a diplomatic treaty, complex, nuanced, and demanding careful interpretation. Her recommendation was unprecedented. Aslan should remain with Marcus, but under strictly controlled conditions that would require significant changes to their current arrangement. The sanctuary faced a decision that had no clear precedent in wildlife rehabilitation protocols. The insurance company remained adamant about their liability concerns. Their legal team had reviewed similar cases and found a disturbing pattern of lawsuits, injuries, and public relations disasters associated with privately raised big cats. They presented Dr. Okaffer with a stack of incident reports: a privately raised tiger that had attacked its caregiver in Michigan, a lion that had escaped from a backyard facility in Texas, and dozens of other cases where good intentions had led to tragic outcomes. Meanwhile, Inspector Mahando returned with additional paperwork and new concerns. The Tanzanian Wildlife Authority had received pressure from international conservation groups, questioning the precedent being set at the sanctuary. Allowing a private individual to raise a lion, even under professional supervision, could be interpreted as endorsing the exotic pet trade that conservation organizations worldwide were fighting to eliminate.
Marcus found himself caught between competing forces, each presenting valid arguments that seemed to cancel out the others. The veterinary board supported his competence and dedication, but questioned the long-term sustainability of the arrangement. Conservation groups praised the rescue, but opposed the precedent. Animal welfare organizations were divided, with some supporting the bond between Marcus and Aslan, while others insisted that wild animals belonged in wild settings. The most painful pressure came from within Marcus himself. His attachment to Aslan had grown beyond professional responsibility into something approaching parental love. The young lion had become his constant companion, his emotional anchor, and his source of daily joy. But his military training had taught him to recognize when personal desires conflicted with strategic necessity. Late at night, with Aslan sleeping peacefully beside his bed, Marcus wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Was he keeping Aslan for the lion's benefit or his own? Could he provide the social and environmental stimulation that a growing lion needed? Was his love for Aslan actually limiting the animal's potential for a full life? The crisis deepened when Dr. Okaffer received an ultimatum from the sanctuary's primary funding organization. They threatened to withdraw financial support unless the lion situation was resolved within 30 days, according to standard wildlife rehabilitation protocols. The implication was clear: either find Aslan an appropriate permanent placement or face the closure of programs that supported hundreds of other animals. Marcus realized that his decision would affect not just Aslan's future, but the survival of the entire sanctuary and its mission to protect East African wildlife. The weight of responsibility felt familiar, similar to the impossible choices he'd faced in combat zones, where every decision carried life or death consequences for multiple people. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Thompson contacted Marcus with news of a revolutionary pilot program being established in Kenya, the first accredited facility designed specifically for human-bonded big cats who couldn't be released into the wild. The Mara Human Wildlife Integration Center was seeking its inaugural residents, animals who could serve as ambassadors while living in expansive, naturalistic environments. Marcus made the hardest decision of his life. He sold his motorcycle, emptied his remaining savings, and purchased 40 acres of pristine savanna adjacent to the new facility. Working alongside the center's architects, he designed a unique living arrangement where Aslan could transition between wild spaces and human interaction zones, maintaining their bond while developing natural behaviors with other rescued lions. The move took place on a crisp morning in August. As Marcus watched Aslan explore his new territory, 10,000 times larger than the small quarters they'd shared, he felt simultaneous heartbreak and profound relief. The young lion bounded through tall grass, climbed acacia trees, and splashed in a natural stream, displaying behaviors that had been impossible in their confined life. But the most extraordinary moment came at sunset. Despite having acres to roam, Aslan returned to the human interaction area where Marcus waited. The lion, now weighing 60 pounds and radiating wild majesty, still sought out his human father's presence and still purred contentedly when Marcus spoke to him. Today, Aslan thrives as an ambassador for wildlife conservation, helping educate thousands of visitors about the complex relationships between humans and wild animals. Their story proves that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means having the courage to let go and create something entirely new. If this incredible journey moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more amazing animal rescue stories. Share this video to spread awareness about wildlife conservation, and let us know in the comments what other extraordinary animal bonds you'd like us to feature next.